Billionaire fakes his death to test his family, and what they do breaks his heart. Imagine finding out you only have a few months left to live, but instead of sadness, you feel ... curiosity. That's exactly what billionaire Ayamide decided to embrace on that cold, cloudy morning. Sitting at the edge of his bed, he held a fake medical report claiming he was dying, not by accident, but by choice. Ayamide had given his children everything anyone could ever dream of: education, wealth, power. But there was one thing he never received in return: true love will only come back when he's in a coffin. Those words, overheard in secret, hit Ayamide like a punch to the chest. Now, he had one final chance to find out who truly cared about him, not about his fortune. The bold plan began, and the news spread faster than a storm wind. The once empty house quickly filled up, but not with affection. Fake hugs, hungry eyes, and voices that talked not about their father's life, but about what they'd do with his inheritance. But Ayamide didn't realize that his lie would uncover an even more painful truth, one that would make him see that a man's worth is never in his bank account, but in the few eyes that still look at him with honesty. Would you have the courage to find out who really loves you before it's too late? Then stay with us till the end, because Ayamide's story will move you to your core. The sky was overcast when Ayamide gathered the family in the grand living room. It was a muggy morning, the kind where the air itself seems to carry a warning. His children sat on the leather couches, the grandchildren piled in corners with their eyes glued to their phones, and his wife, as elegant as ever, sat with no emotion on her face, hands neatly folded on her lap, like someone waiting for a contract to be read. Ayamide stood up slowly. He walked to the center of the room and, with a trembling voice, released a sentence that made the floor tremble. "I will leave everything to whoever loves me at the end, not at the beginning." The words fell like lightning. No screams, no questions, just the sound of a wall clock ticking the seconds like war drums. He didn't read any papers, didn't speak in percentages. He spoke looking them straight in the eye. And that's when he realized no one was listening with their heart, only with calculation. It was as if every word he spoke turned into invisible dollar signs floating above each person's head. His wife, who had shared a bed, meals, and appearances with him for over 40 years, exchanged a quick glance with the housekeeper, a look of someone who understood everything and chose not to get involved. She stayed silent, not out of respect, but strategy. She was far too wise to show any reaction. She knew too much emotion gets in the way of inheritance. The eldest son, Obina, immediately stood up, pulled out his phone, and walked out the back door. He returned a few minutes later with the family lawyer, the same man Ayamide had dismissed 5 years earlier for trying to pressure him into dividing the estate in advance. Obina smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said it would be best to make things official right away, that Dad's mind might not be so clear anymore. Ayamide didn't answer. He just looked, a look carrying 50 years of memories of the times he took the boy to the doctor in the middle of the night, the day he cancelled a trip to care for his son's cold, the promises he had heard, and the absences he had swallowed. But the saddest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the indifference. Obina didn't even realize his father was still standing there, alive, in pain. Meanwhile, the youngest granddaughter was taking photos of the bookshelf where the safes were hidden. She pretended to be photographing her grandfather, but was really capturing details of the gold, the paintings, the old books with hollow pages where Ayamide hid documents. One of the daughters-in-law whispered on the phone to her sister, "He's weaker than they said. If he takes too long, he won't even be able to sign anything." That was the day Ayamide understood. You don't have to die to be buried. They had been digging his emotional grave for years, with smiles, speeches, and holiday invitations that always ended with "you need to take care of your health," and the paperwork. That night, after everyone had left, Ayamide stayed on the porch. The sun set without him noticing. The will was not signed, and it never would be, because now, more than anything, he needed to find out if there was still enough love left in that home to justify any document. He remained there in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the city, thinking about the childhood when a piece of bread and a kiss from his mother were worth more than everything he owned today. It was the first time he felt fear, not of death, but of not having left behind a single memory worth mourning. The big house had always echoed with life, voices crossing through the hallways, footsteps on the old tiles, the smell of roasted fish that Ayamide liked on Fridays. But that week, everything felt calculated. The children came as if clocking in for a shift, bringing gift baskets, treats, perfumes, and leaving with discreet photos of documents, account numbers, records of the property hidden behind the bookshelf. No one asked if he was sleeping well or if he was in pain. They arrived with rehearsed hugs, hands on his shoulders, then quickly checked if the old office safe had been moved. One of the grandsons, a handsome young man with a soft voice, casually asked, "Grandpa, have you already chosen who'll be the main heir?" Ahmad laughed on the inside, but his face didn't move. He looked at the boy and thought of the days he used to tell him bedtime stories about courage. Now, that same boy looked at him like someone evaluating an asset, about to be transferred. The visits always happened at set times. No one slept in the house anymore. They just came in, stayed for an hour or two, and left with shallow excuses. "We have to take care of the kids," said the middle daughter, who had left her children with nannies for years. "I need to close an important deal," explained the son-in-law, who lived off commissions and dreams. Ahmad started keeping track of the schedule. The middle daughter came at 9. The youngest son showed up at 11, always with his wife, who smiled too much and said sweet things that tasted too artificial. In the afternoon came the grandchildren, bringing flowers and taking selfies, all wrapped in a varnish of affection that peeled at the edges. The boldest daughter-in-law came one afternoon with a cake and a plan. She sat in front of him with a wide smile and served a slice. While he chewed slowly, she dropped the suggestion, "Have you thought about donating everything while you're still alive? It avoids so much confusion, you know." Ahmad looked at the wall. There hung a photo of him with his children when they were little, all smiling in simple clothes on a dirt soccer field. He thought about all he had sacrificed to give them comfort, how much life he had put on hold so they could live theirs well. And now, right in front of him, was someone trying to fast forward the goodbye, not with flowers or tears, but with documents and stamps. The housekeeper Yejidi watched everything from a distance. Quiet as always, she kept a notebook where she wrote down the medications, the visits, the meal times, but her eyes said what her mouth never did. She knew that the hustle wasn't about love, it was about interest, and that hurt more than any illness ever could. One of those days, Ahmad asked for someone to read him Psalm 23. None of his children knew it by heart. One of the grandkids looked it up on his phone. The reading was mechanical, soulless, like reading a contract or a medicine label. When it ended, no one commented. They just changed the subject, asking if he had thought about selling the countryside farm, the one where his mother was buried. Little by little, the house stopped being a home. It became an office, a museum, a waiting room. The paintings were photographed, the books flipped through in search of hidden pages. The safe began to be measured with a tape measure. Everything raised suspicion, everything had potential value, but no one, not a single person asked how Ahmad was feeling. No sincere prayers were said. No gesture came from the heart. It was as if he had already died. He was there, lying down, breathing, speaking, but in their eyes, he was just a process, a body counting down to be turned into a deed. And during that time, when every visit was calculated, Ahmad began to lose hope that anything would ever change. He just didn't know someone was coming to break that cycle, someone he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years, and who carried, in their eyes and in their hands, a truth no will could ever predict. It was on a grey afternoon, with dry wind and the rustling of leaves in the hallways, that she appeared. The front door creaked as if it hadn't been opened in years, and the footsteps that came in weren't from someone looking to claim anything, but from someone carrying the weight of having come back too late. No one announced her, no one was expecting her, and maybe that's why it was the only hug Ahmad received without warning, without interest, without calculation. Her name was Zawadi, the youngest daughter, the only one who didn't grow up among lavish parties and etiquette lessons, because at 15, after an argument that broke more than just dishes, she left the house, swearing never to return. She lived in another city, in a neighborhood of dirt roads, and neighbors who knew each other's names. She earned little, selling sweets at the market and teaching children how to write their names. And no matter how much time had passed, Ayo never stopped feeling her absence like a twisted knife in his chest. Zawadi didn't hear about the illness through messages. It was the housekeeper who wrote to her, afraid she'd be scolded. A simple letter, in shaky handwriting, with an almost whispered plea, "Your father is unwell. He needs to see you." She arrived quietly, carrying a lunchbox with rice and fish wrapped in a floral cloth. In her other arm, she held an old, faded blue piece of fabric that Ayamide recognized instantly. It was the same prayer cloth his mother. He used to bless the children before bed. Sawadi had kept it since she was little, and now, after nearly 2 decades, she returned with it in her hands, as if coming back to childhood to heal wounds that not even time could erase. When he saw her, Ayamide didn't know what to say. He just looked at her. His frail body adjusted in the armchair. His eyes welled up, but his mouth found no words. It didn't need to. The silence between them said everything life had never spoken. She knelt at his feet, set the food on the table, and held his hand firmly. "I came, Dad," was all she said. At that moment, Ayamide wanted to tell her everything was a lie, that his illness was a painful act meant to measure the other's affection. He wanted to explain, to ask for forgiveness, to tell the truth, but fear silenced him. Fear of losing that moment of tenderness, fear that the pain would resurface, fear that his daughter might leave again. So he smiled. For the first time since the beginning of the lie, he truly smiled. Not with his lips, but with his heart. The other children took a while to realize she was there. When they did, the sour faces appeared, the veiled questions, the whispers in the halls. "Now she shows up," muttered Obenai. "After all these years, she comes back now," added his wife with a bitter laugh. But Sawadi didn't argue. She wasn't after a will. She didn't want a share of anything. She only wanted to see her father before time, real or fake, took him away. That night, she slept in her childhood room. The bed still had the quilt, embroidered by her grandmother. The book sat dusty on the shelf, and the window pane was still cracked in the same spot. She looked at everything not with the eyes of someone returning to the past, but of someone gently rescuing it. She knelt by the bed, placed the prayer cloth over her shoulders, and prayed. She didn't ask for money, for justice, or for repair. She asked for peace, for her father, for the house, for herself. Across the hallway, Ahmed listened, lying down, heart restless. He let the tears soak the linen pillow. He cried like a boy, like a son, like a father, because in that silent reunion, what hurt most was realizing that the daughter who never cared about his fortune was the only one who brought him comfort. That night marked the beginning of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't healing. It wasn't instant redemption. It was simply truth. And truth, in that house, had become the rarest thing of all. It was a heavy night, the kind where the wind feels like it carries news that hasn't arrived yet. The porch light flickered like a tired flame, and old Ayamide lay on the living room couch, covered up to his chest, pretending to sleep. The sound of the clock broke the silence every second, as if marking not just time, but patience. The housekeeper Yejidi came and went quietly. She wore worn-out slippers, her back slightly hunched, her expression a mix of fatigue and faith. She had been in that house for 32 years. She knew every inch of it, every habit of her boss, every scar in the family. But that night, she didn't know she would be the target of something that would cut through her soul. It began with a whisper. Ayamide could hear it, even with his eyes closed. His wife was speaking with their daughter-in-law in the hallway. The voice was low, but sharp. "Did you see the way she treats him? Sleeps in the living room, prays out loud. Looks like she wants a piece of the inheritance too. That Yezid's no fool." The other replied with a giggle. 30 years serving, she probably thinks she's family. Ayamide felt like a stone had hit his chest. That woman, the same one who had cared for him through fevers, who stayed by his side when he had pneumonia, who still made the porridge with herbs from his childhood, was now being called an opportunist. As if loyalty had become suspicious, as if the love of a faithful servant had no worth. At that moment, Yejedi came in with a blanket in her hands. She looked at Ayamide, who kept pretending to sleep, and gently adjusted the blanket. She murmured an old prayer in her native tongue, a prayer for peace, light, and deliverance. Then, with a heavy heart, she pulled a pillow and lay on the couch across from his. She didn't leave, she stayed, like someone who protects, like someone who loves without expecting anything in return. Ayamide cried softly. He didn't want anyone to see, but the linen pillow grew soaked. That pain was deeper than the betrayal of his children. It hurt because Yejide had never asked for anything, never demanded recognition. She simply served with dignity, with soul, and now she was being judged for it. In the middle of the night, he woke up to the sound of muffled crying. It was Yejide, sitting beside the cold fireplace, hands over her eyes, whispering names. Names of people who had passed. Names Ahmad recognized. Old workers of the house, neighbors from the village, his mother. She cried like someone asking permission to keep going, like someone carrying too much weight in the heart. The next morning, no one spoke of what had happened, but the glances were different. His wife avoided him. The daughter-in-law smiled less, and Yejidi served breakfast with the same grace, but with eyes that were wet. As Ahmad sipped the ginger tea she made every morning, he held her hand for a moment. It was brief, but firm. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to say forgive me, but he didn't, because in that house, true words had become dangerous. In the days that followed, the old man noticed that Yejidi spent more time nearby, not out of interest, but care. She sat with him in silence, read verses from the Quran and the Bible, told stories from when his children were young and used to run through the garden. Sometimes she laughed, other times she sighed, and between the lines, she said what no one else dared to: "You are more than what you own." Ahmad knew that if he died that week, he wouldn't just leave behind assets. He would leave pain, questions, and cracks, but he would also leave something else, a name that, at least to one loyal soul, still meant respect. And that, for him, in that moment, was almost redemption. Because in Yezidi's heart, he was still Ahmad, the man, not the will, not the safe, not the end, just the man. The carefully crafted lie Ahmed had built began to crumble in a way even he hadn't expected. It all started with a strange kind of fatigue, one that didn't go away, not even with the bitter leaf tea Yejidi made. First came the loss of appetite, then broken sleep, then the pain in his chest, but he said nothing, thought it was punishment, or karma, or just the weight of age mixed with the weight of old wounds. Deep down, Ahmad no longer knew where the lie ended and the truth began. The game he invented to test others was now testing him, in his body, his spirit, his soul. It was Zawadi, the rediscovered daughter, who noticed first. She watched him silently, like someone reading a sacred book. She noticed the paler skin, the more distant gaze, the tremble in his hands. On the third sleepless night, she made a decision. She called a doctor quietly, without telling her siblings, without making a fuss. It was an old friend from her time working as a caregiver in a public hospital, a humble doctor, with no golden titles, but with gentle hands and a listening heart. When the doctor arrived, Ahmad didn't react. He just looked at Zawadi with those deep-set eyes of someone who no longer fought anything. The checkup happened right there in the room, filled with the scent of herbs and old wood. Blood pressure, heartbeat, eyes, throat. Then, a hand on his shoulder and a calm warning: "You need tests, real ones. What you're feeling isn't imagined." It was as if the world stopped for a moment. Ahmad went silent. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. He wanted to ask God if it was irony or mercy. Because now, after so much pretending, something inside him was truly fading. And he didn't know if it was his body or his heart. The news spread quickly. The children came swarming in. His wife took on the air of a widow in rehearsal. The daughters-in-law began making lists, mentally dividing the assets, consulting the lawyer more frequently. But Ahmad no longer cared. The game had lost its meaning. All he wanted now was for someone to hold his hand, for someone to tell him he could sleep in peace, that he wouldn't be remembered only as the man who had much, but as the father who tried, even if he failed. In the hallways, the murmurs were constant. They talked about expediting procedures, signing powers of attorney, reviewing documents, but no one asked why he was quieter. No one noticed that Ahmad had stopped speaking, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Exhaustion from screaming in silence, from being seen as a ticking account. He heard everything from his armchair, between coughs, eyes half closed like a man watching his own funeral before it happened. Zawadi, once again, became the point of light. She sat beside him every morning, brought a damp cloth, wiped his forehead, read proverbs in a soft voice, told stories from childhood. She didn't ask about inheritance. She asked if he had dreamed, if he wanted to hear music, if he remembered his mother's voice. And when he said yes, she closed her eyes with him, as if traveling back in time together. Yejidi, despite the side glances, remained steady. She made light soups, mixed healing roots, lit soft incense, tucked prayers along the baseboards of the rooms, as was the custom of her village. And Aamide, even without strength, could feel it. He felt there was something beyond the end, something that couldn't be notarized, something that couldn't be locked in a safe dot. It was during this time that he began to question everything. Was it worth it building so much and feeling so little? Is love about giving, or about being? Had his children truly learned from him, or had they only inherited his absence? In that stuffy room, filled with memories and silences, Aamide understood that death doesn't announce itself with a flag. It arrives like Zawadi did, slowly, without promises. And when it comes, what matters isn't the wealth, but the arms around you. Not the accounts, but the eyes that still see the man behind the fear. That night, as he closed his eyes, Aamide didn't think of any will. He thought only of a hand holding his, any hand, from someone who wasn't there for the paperwork, but for love. The sun rose timidly that morning, as if asking permission to shine on a house where smiles had become rare. The hallways were quiet, but not the peace-filled kind of quiet. It was the silence of waiting, of tension, of those pauses that come just before hard news. Aamide no longer left his room. His body felt lighter, but not from health. It was the weight of the soul dissolving, like clay after the rain. Yejide entered the room with a book in her hand. Not a tray, not medicine. It was the old Bible from Aamide's shelf, the one he hadn't opened since his mother's funeral. Its edges were yellowed, some pages torn, others marked with dried leaves from a time when he still believed faith could heal wounds money could never reach. She didn't ask for permission. She simply sat beside him, opened the book, and began to read. Her voice was steady, but gentle, slow, but sure. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in the day of trouble. It was Psalm 41. Aamide was breathing with difficulty, but every word seemed to pierce his chest, both bomb and blade. The Lord will protect him and keep him alive, and he will be blessed on the earth. Yejide stopped, closed the book, slowly, met his gaze and said, "You were never poor, Aamide, at least, not in your pocket, but today you need mercy, and that can't be bought." Aamide felt the weight of it like a slap and an embrace at the same time. He wanted to respond, to argue, but all he could manage was a single tear slipping down his face. The memory hit him hard. His mother, Olamide, kneeling on a dirt floor, holding an aluminum plate, a cloth wrapped around her head, praying that her son would have all he deserves, but also learn to share. He had shared businesses, cars, land, but never his heart. He had kept affection locked inside, like a relic, as if to love was to risk losing. And now, lying there, fragile, he was the one silently begging for a sliver of tenderness. Yejide went on, not reading from the Bible anymore, but telling stories. She spoke of the day Aamide returned home young and ambitious, swearing he'd never set foot on the dirt roads of his childhood again. She recalled how he cried in secret at his middle daughter's wedding, because she treated him like an obligation, not a father. She remembered how he once yelled at her, the housekeeper, over a towel out of place, but later that night, left an envelope with tuition money for her granddaughter, without a word. She wasn't there for a paycheck. She was there for memory, for loyalty, because sometimes, what holds two human beings together isn't blood, or law, or gratitude. It's a kind of love that doesn't need a name, only presence. Aamide looked at her, as if seeing for the first time something that had always been there, and in that moment, he didn't see a servant. He saw a woman, a witness to his life, the only one who stayed when everyone else treated him like a walking will. She didn't want his house, she didn't want his car, she wanted him not to leave this world with a closed heart, and that, in that moment, was worth more than any inheritance. Later that same day, he asked that the Bible be left by his bed. He touched the worn cover like someone touching something sacred that had been lost to time, and he whispered, almost voiceless, "May God see me." Through her eyes, around the house, the others didn't understand why Yejide walked around with the book in her hands. They thought it was excessive care or fanaticism, but Aamide knew. In that simple reading lay the bridge between the man he had pretended to be and the one he could still become, even if only in the final chapter of his life. It was on a muggy morning, the kind where even the palm trees at the gate stood still, that something forgotten by time decided to speak. The heat made everyone irritable, and the tension in the house hung like a heavy fog. You could feel it on your skin, in your breath, in the way everyone avoided eye contact. The children argued more than usual. His wife paced from room to room, as if searching for certainty behind every door. But the deepest truth was still hidden behind a painting in a forgotten corner of the reading room. The painting was of Iamid's grandfather, a stern man with a hard gaze and steady hands, who had founded the family's first fabric shop. It had always hung there, a symbol of honor and origin, but no one ever looked at it closely, until a sudden gust of wind burst the window open, knocking over a smaller frame and making the large portrait sway. Zawadi was nearby. She rushed to steady it on the wall, and that's when she noticed something behind it. Carefully, she pulled back the thick fabric and found a yellowed envelope, sealed with old wax, tucked between the frame and the wall. It was free of dust, as if time itself had protected it. On the front was a firm signature, Ayamide. The handwritten date stung 12 years ago, long before the pretending, long before the illnesses real or staged. She brought the envelope to her father, who lay in bed with half-closed eyes. At the sight of the paper, he took a while to react. He reached out slowly, as if touching a dangerous memory. He broke the seal with trembling fingers. Read in silence. His breathing grew heavy, his eyes filled. It was the original will, the real one, written when his heart was still full of anger, and with a nearly unconscious urge to punish. In that will, Ayamide left nothing to his children. No assets, no shares, nothing. His entire fortune was to go to small institutions, to projects in poor communities, and part of it would be managed by Yej. A final clause written in bold, firm letters said, "I leave nothing to those who saw me not." As a man, but as a vault, Zawadi said nothing. She didn't ask, didn't judge. She simply looked at her father with the calm understanding of someone who recognizes the weight of regret. Ayamide, in turn, found himself at a crossroads. What was harder, to uphold words written in pain, or to try rewriting everything through the lens of his own fragility? The lawyer was called. He read the document carefully. The law was clear. If Ayamide died that week, and no new will was registered, this would be the binding one. The family went into a state of alert. The masks dropped completely. The eldest son demanded the will be redone. The wife said it was the product of a sick mind. The middle daughter cried, but her eyes betrayed the calculation. None of them were worried about his soul, only about what he would leave behind. Ayamide remained silent. The noise around him grew louder. Yelling, bargaining, threats. But within him, there was only quiet. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of decision. Because in that envelope was his pain, frozen in time. A piece of his story that could no longer be erased, only understood. That night, Zawadi sat with him and asked, "Do you still feel this way?" Ayamide didn't answer with words. He simply closed his eyes and let a single tear fall. It was his way of saying no. That the man who wrote that will was no longer the same. That the lie had led him to the truth, a truth that hurt, but also set him free. And now, more than inheritance, he wanted to leave behind memory, and, if possible, forgiveness. Even if late, even if flawed, even if it was just a gesture, but a true one. The night fell heavy, as if time itself had paused to listen to what can only be spoken in the hours when the world sleeps. The house was quiet, but not at peace. It was the kind of silence filled with the echoes of unspoken fights, swallowed words, and glances that had been dodged throughout the day. Ayamide couldn't sleep. His body no longer obeyed him, and his mind, restless like a wild horse, kept replaying scenes from the past with cruel clarity. It was Yejidi who noticed. She entered the room with light steps, brought a damp cloth to cool his forehead, and asked bluntly, "Should I call someone?" He hesitated. For a moment, he thought of saying no. But then, in a voice barely audible, he murmured, "Call the priest, the old one, from the village." She nodded and left with the calm urgency of someone who already understood what that night was asking for. The priest arrived not long after. He wore no cassock, no visible cross, just a plain shirt, linen trousers, worn-out sandals. He entered the room without formality, like someone stepping into the home of an old friend, and sat beside the bed with a sigh that carried both weariness and nostalgia. Ayamide looked at him with difficulty, but his tired eyes lit up for a moment. They stayed in silence for a while. Then Ayamide spoke first. "What if I die hated by my children, father?" His voice was hoarse, but thick with an old fear that kind money was never able to hide. The priest took a deep breath. He didn't answer right away. He picked a book off the shelf, flipped through it absent-mindedly, and only then said, "You'll die known by God. Is that enough?" The question hung in the air like incense. Ahamide turned his face toward the window. Outside, the full moon lit up the dry branches in the garden. He thought about all he had built, bought, and stored. Thought of the promises he never kept, the letters he never wrote, the birthdays he forgot. He thought of his mother, who used to tell him, when he was still a boy, "Son, those who plant in concrete only harvest regret." He turned back to the priest. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness." The priest gave a faint smile, the kind worn by those who've heard that sentence 1,000 times, from different mouths, but always with the same tremble in the soul. Forgiveness doesn't come when you deserve it. It comes when you're finally willing to stop pretending. You don't need it. In that moment, Ahamide broke, not like someone collapsing, but like someone letting go of a burden. He cried without shame, without hiding, like a lost child in a marketplace, like a man who finally recognized his own loneliness. He asked for forgiveness, not with rehearsed lines, but with crooked confessions. He spoke of the will, the plan, the shame, the fear of dying without leaving behind anything good, beyond titles and properties. The priest listened with patience. He never interrupted. He just nodded from time to time, eyes glistening. When Ahamide finished, the old priest simply said, "You've done much with your hands, Ahamide, but now is the time to do something with your heart." They prayed together, not a memorized prayer, but a whisper woven from faith and repentance. And when the priest stood to leave, Ahamide gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Thank you for still seeing me." The priest only placed a hand on his shoulder, and replied, "God sees even what you've hidden from yourself." After he left, Ahamide remained there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. It wasn't healing. It wasn't a promise. It was the beginning of surrender. Because some wounds can only ease when pride finally grows quiet. And that night, the silence didn't hurt. It held him, as if it said, "There's still time. Maybe not to change everything, but not to die in vain." The morning after the priest's visit, Ahamide's house seemed split by an invisible line, not drawn on the floor, but etched in behavior. Half of those present acted like heirs, the other half like guardians of a farewell. The meeting room, once used for contract negotiations and family decisions, had become a silent battlefield. The older children slept there on luxury mattresses, surrounded by papers, laptops, and legal consultants. On the other side of the house, the old man's room, now scented with herbs and prayers, welcomed only 3 people: Zawadi, Yejide, and the youngest grandson, Chinedu. Chinedu was just 7 years old, with wide eyes and a mature kind of quiet. He didn't understand contracts, legal terms, or numbers, but he sensed what the adults had long stopped noticing. He felt that his grandfather was sad even in his sleep. One day, he stepped into the room barefoot, quietly, and approached the bed. Ahamide was sleeping, breathing deeply, like someone dreaming of a place they've never seen. Chinedu touched his hand and whispered, "Grandpa, you're sad even when you sleep." That sentence broke something inside the old man. It was as if a child had translated his entire life into a single line. He said nothing in that moment. He simply opened his eyes slowly and squeezed his grandson's fingers. That small, silent gesture was the spark. In that moment, Ahamide decided it was time to tell the truth. There was no more time for games, no more strength for secrets. He called for Zawadi, asked her to gather everyone, said he wanted to speak, not through lawyers or videos, but with his own voice, while he still had it. His daughter obeyed. She gathered the siblings, the daughters-in-law, his wife. Everyone sat in the grand room of the house, the same one where, years ago, he had announced the will out loud. But now, the tone was different. Ahamide entered in a wheelchair. His face was weary, but his eyes, those eyes hardened by time, were clear, almost soft. He asked not to be interrupted, and then, he began. He told them everything. The plan, the pretending, the illness that was a lie, until it wasn't. He said he did it all to find out who truly loved him, and that the truth hurt him more than any diagnosis ever could. He spoke of the fake embraces, the calculated visits, the hungry eyes that no longer saw a man, just a check waiting to be signed. There was shock, some feigned surprise. Others looked away. Zawadi stood beside him. Yejide stood behind the chair, hands clasped. Chinedu, in the corner, clutched a small cloth doll he had brought from the village. Ahamide continued. He said the original will had been found. and that if he passed that week, it would still be legally valid. But he was considering rewriting it, not out of anger, but out of justice. He said he didn't want to reward flatterers, nor punish with vengeance. He only wanted to leave something to those who loved him with truth. The eldest son stood up, tried to interrupt, but was held back by his wife. The middle daughter wept, but there was no more room for excuses. In that moment, Ahamide wasn't seeking understanding, only one final act of dignity. After he finished, he asked to return to his room. He was tired. As he was wheeled away, he heard the murmurs. He realized that even in the face of truth, some were still focused on the inheritance, but he no longer cared. Because when he looked at Zawadi, at Yejidi, and at Chinedu, he knew he had left behind something greater than houses and cars. He had left a truth, and maybe a clean memory. That night, there were no arguments in the house, only silence. Half slept in the meeting room, the other half near the old man, and between sleep and wakefulness, Ahamide thought, life doesn't wait, and truth, when it comes, doesn't need applause. It just needs to remain. And he drifted off like that, between a house divided and the hope that love, even late, might still unite what money had torn apart. The day dawned with a different kind of silence, not the heavy silence of doubt, nor the tense silence of waiting. It was the silence of farewell, the kind that arrives just before the news itself. A soft breeze moved through the halls of the house, and the curtains swayed as if waving goodbye to someone about to depart. The sun, shy, didn't flood the rooms with brightness. It simply touched the walls gently, as if honoring morning before it had officially begun. Did not wake up that day. His body, weary and finally at peace, rested like a boat that had reached the end of its voyage. He was serene. In bed, his hand still held another Yezhets, who had fallen asleep beside the armchair. On the other side, Zawadi sat with her eyes open, praying in silence. Between the two women who had loved him without demand, Ahamide departed without pain. His final breath brought no drama, no cries. It was gentle, as if he had simply returned to the place he came from. The house took time to realize. The children, still locked in the meeting room, were arguing over clauses and amounts. The daughters-in-law spoke of cars, names on deeds, titles of ownership. But when Yejidi stepped out of the room with tears in her eyes, and Zawadi followed silently, everyone understood. Ahamide was gone. And what remained now wasn't wealth. It was the echo of what he had left in each of them. That same day, the lawyer arrived with a flash drive. He said Ahamide had recorded a video weeks earlier, asking for it to be shown at his wake. The room was prepared. Chairs were lined up. The children looked uneasy. The grandchildren sat quietly. Zawadi stood, firm. Yejidi remained at the back, hands folded over her apron. The video began. Ahamide appeared, seated, his face already worn, but his eyes alive. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I'm no longer here. I don't want paper tears or empty speeches. I want you to listen, because what I'm about to say isn't about inheritance, it's about truth." The video lasted 15 minutes. Ahamide spoke of his mistakes, of his absences, of the plan he created to test love, of the disappointment, but also of the surprises. He spoke of Zawadi, the daughter who returned with hands full of affection and not a single demand. He spoke of Yejide, the woman who cared for him with more love than many children. He spoke of Chinedu, the grandson who gave him back tenderness with a single sentence. And then came the announcement. The inheritance would not be divided by blood. It would be divided by gestures. A new will, handwritten and registered in the presence of the priest, made it clear each asset would be given not according to surname, but according to heart. The middle daughter received the community school Ahamide had founded years before, a place where, according to him, she could relearn the value of simplicity. The eldest son inherited the textile factory, on the condition that it remain open and employ single mothers from the village. His wife, who lived beside him without truly being with him, was left a modest house in the countryside, so she could rediscover silence. But what came next left the room breathless. The pocket watch, Ahamide's oldest symbol of power, was left to Chinedu, with a letter. "You saw time in my eyes. May it teach you to love before it's too late." The house where it all happened was given to Yejidi, along with a deed that read, "Here, you cared, prayed, lived. Now it's yours. May the footsteps that enter it be as gentle as yours." And for Zawadi, he left a notebook filled with handwritten pages, telling his story. And at the end, One sentence: memory is the only inheritance that can't be stolen. Take care of mine with love. The room was silent. No longer a silence of waiting or calculation. It was a silence of justice, of awe, of a new beginning. Some cried. Others didn't know what to do with their hands. But no one left the room the same. Ayamide departed without a sound. But he left a noise in every heart that no will could silence. Because in the end, his legacy was a mirror. It showed each person who they truly were, and gave them not what they wanted, but what they had sown. And that, more than gold or land, was the greatest legacy he could leave behind. After the funeral, when everyone had said their scripted phrases, when the formal hugs were handed out like business cards, and the flowers began to wilt at the edge of the gate, the house fell silent. A silence that didn't hurt. A silence that hid nothing. It simply allowed everything to finally settle. There was no celebration, no toast, no meeting for the reading of documents, because everyone already knew that farewell video, as direct as it was heartfelt, had done what Ayamide's entire life couldn't: reveal the truth without masks, without fantasy, without favors. And maybe, for the first time, everyone there saw themselves reflected in the mirror of conscience. Obinar, the eldest son, spent days locked in his room. When he finally stepped out, he said nothing. He looked at his father's old office, and didn't go in. Instead, he took a notebook and wrote something no one read. The middle daughter wept on the phone, saying she didn't expect that, though deep down, she knew. The wife sat in silence on the veranda, gazing into the horizon with eyes that seemed to finally understand the emptiness that forms when you live beside someone you never truly knew. But there were 3 people who needed no comfort, because they carried within themselves the peace that comes from having lived the truth. Zawadi walked the halls of the house with steady steps. She hadn't inherited safes or estates, she inherited the story. And in the right hands, a story becomes a seed. At night, she would sit in her father's room, read the pages he had left for her, and smile. Not a smile of triumph, but of honor. Chinedu, wearing the old pocket watch on a blue ribbon around his neck, walked with the lightness of someone who carries time like a treasure. He touched the cool metal as if it were his grandfather's hand still there, and every now and then he'd say, "Grandpa still lives here," just in silence. Yejedi was the last to remain in the house after everyone else had gone. She cleaned each room as she had for the past 30 years, but now with a different gesture, no longer as a servant, but as a guardian. She walked through the spaces unhurriedly, as if blessing the floors. She slept in the same armchair in the living room, now hers by right and by merit. And when neighbors came to ask if everything was all right, she simply said, "The house is at peace. He's gone, but he left his soul here." The inheritance didn't turn into scandal. It became a sigh. No one got what they wanted, but everyone received what they deserved. And that kind of justice, quiet, measured, was more powerful than any courtroom battle, because it wasn't written with ink, it was written with soul. Ayamide's name didn't become a statue, or a street, or a building. It became a story told by the lips that still pray for him, by the hands that once cared for him, by the memories that refused to fade. And those are the kinds of legacies that time cannot destroy, because love, unlike fortune, cannot be measured. It can only be recognized, and the silence that filled that house was the sound of love, at last, having won. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to see this, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell to stay updated on the next chapters. Your presence here makes all the difference.